Welcome to the Mental Health Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Stu. Unfortunately, Bradley is off sick this week. Yeah, he's got the lurgy. We don't know what's wrong with him. He just moaned, clutched his brow, got his delicate little lace handkerchief out and started wafting it around his face. All the usual, you know, all that kind of normal stuff. So, yeah, anyway, in all seriousness, hope he's better soon. So, shout out to you, Brad. Lots of love, mate. And of course, I'll be bringing you all the usual wit, charm, intelligence, all of those things that you would expect. And there you go, that's the first joke of the episode. It'll be a bit truncated, but I'll hopefully keep you entertained for half an hour, whatever. So the first game I want to talk about this week is Resident Evil Village, aka Resident Evil 8. Now, I've been a fan of Resi since the moment it came out. I had a great memory of playing the original with my mate back in the day, and I was in the middle of smoking a joint and I didn't know what was going on or what to do next, and my mate recommended looking inside the Wolf of the West book or whatever it's called, rather than just staring ponderously at its cover in the options and in the inventory rather. And lo and behold, you investigate, and inside is the wolf medal, and then you can enter that into the statue next to the thing, and the water drains from the thing, and you go down the thing, and it's so good. And you know, it seems like charmingly simplistic in retrospect, but it was at the time, it was like, oh my god, you can open up this 3D object and there's another 3D object inside it, and that's just in the menus. So yeah, that was a big leap forward at the time. Yeah, it does seem silly saying it now, but that was the charm of the games. The charm of the games was that it was exploration, and it was discovery, and it was solving fairly simple puzzles, but in a kind of fairly mechanical and physical way that felt a little bit more interactive than anything you'd done before. There was some similar stuff in Tomb Raider, but you know, it was more find the key and then that'll unlock this thing, rather than, you know, you place these objects in a certain order and it'll unlock it. And yeah, again, basic by today's standards, but back in the day it was a revelation. And there we are in the present day playing the supposed 8th iteration. It's more like the 25th if you count all the side stories as well. And it's going from strength to strength. Well, it isn't. It depends on your point of view. I'm always happy to have change. Me and Brad have always said, like, it's great having new directions in the series. So there's been sort of, in the mainline series, there's been 2 huge changes. The first was Resident Evil 4, which took it from the static camera to the movable camera, tank controls behind in the third person over the shoulder perspective. And then Resident Evil 7 brought in the first person view, and Resident Evil Village number 8 has this view as well, and the same protagonist. So is it any good? Yeah, it's a really good game. It's a better game than 7, which I thought was alright, but it had its flaws. I thought it started great as an almost pure horror game, and then it kind of ended up being much more of an action game with enemies that not particularly fantastic. The boss fights were good, but I thought the standard enemies were not great for the series. And this takes another direction again, and it goes like very gothic. It goes back to... It doesn't even really go back to... It starts off a new trend in following Hammer horror kind of stylings. So the original game is very Romero, you know, it's traditional zombies with the odd bioweapon thrown in, and there's underground labs, and there's, you know, old mansions, whereas this is much more dusty castles, over the top caricature creatures and lichens, werewolves, you know, vampire style enemies. It starts off, for the first, you know, half of the game even, being very much like that. And then it starts to sort of steal things from other games, which is fine, and it goes a bit more, well, I'd say wider horror game, you know. It starts bringing in other psychological and creep factors that start getting reminiscent of Silent Hill in its heyday. And then right at the end, it's sort of very later Silent Hill. It's a factory setting. Spoilers, sorry. Yeah, there's spoilers for the game. Should have said, it's quite old now, so, you know, I protect myself with my shield of journalistic integrity, or whatever you call it. So, yeah, it goes to a state where it's a little bit more predictable and a bit overlong, I would say. So it does outstay its welcome by a slight amount, only by a few hours, and only if you're playing it through the first time. But generally speaking, it's great. It's got great combat, nice movement. It's got beautiful visuals. The RE engine is really great for this kind of thing. It does high contrast shadows really, really well just out of the box. So you get that atmospheric hit of when you're walking around this sort of titular village, it actually feels like, you know, this kind of garish, over the top place with really bright colours in some places and really hard, stark shadows in others. And it's, you know, that's a very Hammerish kind of thing to do, and I really appreciate that. That generating that atmosphere is really not that easy. It's expensive and time consuming, and they've done a great job with it, especially in the early game. And it really does kind of peak towards the sort of second third of the game, really, with the third act being a bit superfluous. But it's got a good story, it's got some great dialogue in there. One where one of the bosses takes the piss out of Chris, which is absolutely superb, right near the end, and all sorts. It's really, really good. Now, I played it with two things actually. I played it within the third person mod, so I bought it cheap, and then I bought the DLC, which wasn't particularly cheap. But I really wanted to play it in third person because I enjoy Resi games in that style very much more than first, and really enjoyed that. I don't think purists would like it very much because it kind of doesn't work properly. It kind of unbalances the experience a little bit. Maybe makes it a little bit easier, but definitely makes it less scary. But I don't mind that. For me, it's Resident Evil is supposed to be kind of tense, atmospheric, and, you know, you're supposed to see your guy take more damage and stuff like that. That's fine for me, but a lot of people will feel it's much less scary and a lot less immersive. So it's going to be purely down to personal taste. I'd say if you're not sold on the idea, don't pay for the DLC. Wait till it's a couple of quid, or it's even free sometime in many years' time, and then replay the game and it'll feel like you're playing it from scratch. I also bought infinite weaponry. Like, I bought all the weapon. Like, I bought the DLC that gives you all the weapons and infinite ammo, and just kind of sort of cheesed my way through it like that. It still wasn't easy. I still died loads because not knowing the boss patterns, not knowing where enemies appear, not knowing their attack routines, you can still get overwhelmed really fast. It's a difficult game. I didn't use the block very much, and it's got a block button. I think using that would kind of transform it a little bit. So yeah, it is a little overlong, but what's great about it is you can still do a really quick speedrun. And I mentioned on the podcast a few weeks ago that the best thing about Resi games is that they feel like a substantial, meaty kind of experience first time round, where you're really scared, you're unprepared for the shocks, and there are some real shocks in this. I got really genuinely scared by one part of it that involved a baby. I won't say any more than that, but you'll know it when you come to it. And then the second time through, or third, you are bizzing through really quickly. You've got upgraded weapons, and it's much more about how fast you can do it and how skillfully you can do the puzzles and how good your memory is about which location to go to next and how to do the tricks and the puzzles and stuff like that. And it has that as well. It can be done in around a couple of hours, which is pretty fast if you know what you're doing and you've got the right weaponry. So it's a really good game. I would highly recommend it. Is it one of the best Resis of the modern era? Definitely. But it's such a wide, mixed bag, Resi. You know, you can play the original set of games and they're one thing. You can play the remakes and they're another. The remakes, I mean, the remake of the time, so of around the early 2000s Resident Evil remake. Then there's remakes of 2 and 3, which are completely different again from them, and they're in third person, and they're great in a different way. And then there's the Resident Evil Revelations games, Revelations 1 and 2, which have got the best mercenary mode, in my opinion, if you want to play those. There's just so much. Code Veronica is different again. They have kept the variety in these games, which I really like. So yeah, it's really good. Where it stands in the pantheon is going to depend on you. I would say incontrovertibly that it is a little too long the first time out. In the last section drags a little bit, and it's a bit more boring and a bit more samey and staid than the rest, and you feel like it's put in just to make the game larger, which is not necessary. I think I took probably about, the time on the clock for me was about 9 hours, but in reality that was more like 18. I think if they chopped that last section and made it just a kind of 10-12 hour experience first time round, maybe even less than that for people who are less inept than I am, that would have been ideal. But hey, we are where we are. It's still a great game. Pick it up. Good fun, fairly cheap, looks good, runs a bit janky on the PC, but yeah, get a cheap copy on your console, you're probably laughing. The next two things I'm going to talk about are both mods for PC, but they're interesting. Please don't leave. Please don't leave. They are very good and they are very interesting. And they're not on Steam Deck, which is what me and Brad normally talk about. So the first one I'm going to talk about is TIE Fighter. Now, if you don't know, TIE Fighter is a LucasArts game from the mid to early 90s actually, so it's like nearly 30 years old now at this point. And it was when LucasArts were at their absolute heyday. And it's a part of a series of ship-based fighting simulator games that they brought out. Obviously, by the title, you know you're in a TIE Fighter. And it was preceded by X-Wing, and then there was a game called X-Wing Alliance, and there were a couple of mod packs and stuff, as you'd expect. And they were hugely popular, and they totally blended that thing of the PC, because it had tons of keys, and you could buy really expensive joysticks, like proper flight sticks for it, that it had a really good simulator feel, but it had the full weight of LucasArts and George Lucas behind it, so it not only felt like Star Wars, both aesthetically and story-wise, but also all of the way that you use the simulator side of it was very Star Wars focused. So it's about switching between your shields and your weapons, because you've got to maintain your energy. It's about targeting certain enemies, targeting items, collecting cargo, docking, all sorts of things that you would expect from a space simulator that's midway between feeling like Star Trek, which is basically great big battleships in space, and Star Wars, which is, in the films at least, just like, planes within atmosphere, like in World War II. And it blends the two, so you have the best of both worlds, and it works absolutely brilliantly. Now, what this has done is, there was in the sort of early 2000s, I think, or 2010s, there was a new engine created for X-Wing Alliance, which was the final game in that series, if memory serves, and was the most advanced. And so they created an even more advanced engine for it. Still, fairly, it's a it's a fan project, so it's still basic by today's standards. It's not a AAA release by any stretch, but it looks really nice, runs really well, and in different ratios for different sizes screens. So your standard 16:9, but bigger if you want it. All the mod cons, all the things that you would expect. So it has some much better graphical options. It runs flawlessly, smoothly at any frame rate you want, and in the right ratio. It fits your modern gaming experience, basically. So it takes all of that stuff that you love about good PC mods and adds them into this X-Wing game. What has been done further to that is a conversion of what is thought of as the best game, which is TIE Fighter in that series, and done a total conversion so that works on this Alliance engine. Now, getting all of this working is dead simple. So all I did, I bought the game on Steam. It was on sale for like £1.49, so I bought X-Wing Alliance, the original. Then I downloaded the mod pack, which comes in a zip file, uninstalled it, played the game once so it built its files up, turned it off. Then I downloaded the two TIE Fighter total conversion things, which is just the first one and its update, unzip them, stuck them in the folders. That's all I needed to do there. And then the final thing, first time you run it, you click on a little configurator, which is like an injector. It injects options and stuff into old games. So when you've got mods, you very often have these injectors that do this for you. They're just like a little menu, basically. Very front-end friendly, great user experience stuff. Click on that, just say which version you want to play, what options, whether you want to use the original sound or the new sound, one of the old MIDI files or the new stuff, new visuals or old, anything you want, dead easy to tweak, and you're in. Now, On top of this, it supports VR unbelievably. Fan project, works with VR. Now, cockpit experiences in VR games are very often the absolute best because you sat down, you don't have to worry about motion. All you have to do is move your head around and feel like you're inside the cockpit of whatever you're in, whether it's a spaceship, whether it's a fighter pilot, cockpit or whatever, whether it's in a car, race car. Feels great. And this works perfectly. I've not had any trouble whatsoever with VR. Doesn't make me sick. Very smooth, really high res, even more immersive. It's one of those things that is you're sitting there thinking, can I afford to, for example, can I buy the new Quest headset? Will I get enough out of it for however much it costs, 400, 500 quid? Is it worth me getting a PS5 and a PSVR 2 when that's 500 quid for the headset alone, and then there's the games? Whereas with this, if you've got a headset or even an old one like I have, a Rift S, you can just play it and it costs you effectively nothing. Well, actually nothing. Amazing. Great to keep one around. Keep a headset around on your PC if you can. And works flawlessly. And then the third mod which comes into it is one that I bought, which is Voice Attack. Now this is something that you can buy on Steam, and it works using a combination of Voice Attack's own technology and the built-in Windows voice recognition tech. And it just allows you to do commands and controls in-game using your voice. Now, this is useful anyway for pretty much anything, but especially games with lots of buttons, especially games that use keyboards, especially that use keyboard shortcuts and multiple key presses. And here's the clincher, when you're in VR, you can't see your keyboard, so it cuts out having to be like, oh bloody hell, have I got to try and memorise in physical space where my keys are to press them? Don't have to do that anymore. So I bound all sorts to it, target the next enemy in reticle, target the next objective, change my speed to a third, change it up to full power, switch energy from weapons to deflectors, all of these things just with single word commands that you specify, and that it records and it gets used to your voice and your stupid northern accent. And it's brilliant. That cost me about $6.50 I think in the Steam sale, so I spent under a tenner on all this, and I've now got the best Star Wars flight simulator possible with voice attack controls and in VR. And that's like the gaming golden path. It's when everything comes together. It's cheap, it's easy, it's not technically demanding, it's not difficult to set up, and it gives you an amazing experience that you can't replicate anywhere else. It's a much better game already than Star Wars Squadrons, which came out recently, which was alright, wasn't bad, but I just felt that the controls weren't entirely right, the missions were a bit repetitive, and the difficulty was really high. And the difficulty is high on this, but just the way that you do it in small chunks and missions works really well. Absolutely fantastic. Even without VR, even without voice command, I could highly recommend it. It's really cheap to buy, X-Wing Alliance. But if you have the option to get voice attack, I would highly recommend that. And if you own a VR headset already for PC, it's an absolute must purchase. So just go for it is all I can say. Unless you absolutely hate simulator games, then obviously don't bother with it then. But if you even like them a little bit and you want to experiment and play around with it for like a couple of quid for the game and then a few more quid for voice attack, absolutely great. You'll get all of your money's worth out of it. Now my final game of the week is yet another ancient game. Not quite as ancient as X-Wing Alliance and TIE Fighter, but almost. And that is Quake. So why am I playing Quake again when I played it a few months ago on my Xbox? Because they managed to get the rights to it and all the original Nine Inch Nails Trent Reznor music, and played it to completion all the way through then. Well, I'll tell you for why. It's because there is another fan-made project, and this has added RTX, ray trace lighting, to Quake. Now, you'll remember that they've done this with Quake 2, which I also played with RTX. I have to say that so far from what I've experienced, the implementation of this is far more successful than it is in Quake 2 RTX, much better. And the reason seems to be, and I'm no expert on this stuff, but it looks like they've gone for more things like glow and environmental effects. So ray traced contact lighting, shadows and glow, than they have gone for ray traced reflections. Now there are some ray traced reflections in it, but not very many, and they're normally nicely used effects. It's not crazy, but your mileage will vary depending on your hardware, obviously. So you can skip this bit if you're not interested, but what I've got it set to, I tried to put the DLSS injector in there so that it would be able to use that, but for some reason it's not detecting it. That'll be on my end, something I did wrong, so I'm not worried about it. I'm using FSR, so if you don't know what FSR is a software-based resolution image upscaler. So DLSS is a hardware-based one based on your graphics cards, NVIDIA graphics cards, whereas AMD developed, I believe it's AMD, developed FSR Fidelity X, I think, super resolution. So it's a software scaler. So obviously it's not as good as DLSS, but it's good. It'll work on any computer, and it works on mine. I've stuck it on balanced, so the ray trace effects aren't crazy over the top, but they add so much atmosphere. They add a lot of depth, and one of the things that's great about injecting this stuff into old games is that obviously a lot of the textures and patterns are very basic and they're repeated, and attractive stuff really that was in the original game really stands out, different architecture, etc. Whereas the injector, with having the realism of, smoky lighting and filtered light coming in through non-direct sources, bounced lighting off walls and floors, glow from dimly lit little bulbs, in the corners, things like that, it adds a lot of atmosphere to even basic rooms. And when you walk into a big open environment that has, in Quake, the equivalent of strip lighting, because it's set in the future, the difference between the two is much more pronounced, because it doesn't just have this generic unfiltered lighting texture or screen. It doesn't even it's way before screen space ambient occlusion, so it doesn't even have like sharp contrasty shadows and stuff like that in the original game. So you end up with all of these shadows where they should be, and you get light filtering down from bulbs that should be there, and you're like, oh, that's what. I see. So what they've done is the developers meant it to look like this. That's what they were going for. And instead of you being like, there's a cone of light that's spread across the wall that looks like just a different texture, it actually looks like there's one texture and there's light that's streaming down, and it changes depending on where you are in the room. And all of that is like, if you try and do that on modern games, it's so expensive that it tanks your performance. And they've really struggled in this current generation with trying to get the balance right with that. Hence the need for stuff like DLSS, so you can run things at a lower internal resolution, which is then upscaled. With this, that doesn't matter. It does. I'm having to run it at 1440p rather than at 4K because it's demanding, and even then I'm running it on balance rather than quality mode. Again, if I could activate DLSS, that might change. But anyway, it doesn't matter because it looks phenomenal. And I really love that, because it's telling the computer that this thing is a bulb, this thing is a shaft of light from the sky, this thing is a hard shadow, this is where it should be going, and you just tell the computer to work it out from that, and it does it. And so not only are you making the game more like have the atmosphere that the developers originally intended, you're not changing the game really into something that it isn't, because all you're doing is saying, computer, make sure that you do this, put this thing in where it should be based on these coordinates. So it's a lovely way of taking an old game and adding some really wonderful, atmospheric, scary, dingy, grim, visceral stuff to an old game. And this was a fan project, and I'm hoping that we see it from all sorts of different areas as the years go on, because the things that you could do with, to go back to the Resident Evil games, any of the early 3D stuff would benefit from it massively for a start, but then anything even later than that, stuff that started to look a little bit kind of dated or bland, The textures start looking a bit flat. I'm thinking of early PS3 and 360 stuff specifically, but also imagine chucking it into like the likes of Ridge Racer or not Outrun because it's like 2D, but Outrun 2. I would love to see what it looks like. It might ruin the game, but in some cases it's just going to be chef's kiss, and it's going to be great seeing this come in. So as the cost of this technology goes down, the ease of use goes up, the number of engines that have it built in, like the Unreal 5 engine and stuff, the more technology catches up, I reckon the more fan projects we'll see with this stuff chucked in and giving stuff not even just a new lease of life, but making them the games that they could have been if that technology was there at the time, because that was already in the designer's head. Absolutely great. I would really recommend checking this out. It's a free upgrade. The game itself is still cheap. If it's not cheap enough for you, the Steam sale will be along very, very shortly. The Christmas sale, wait for that. Grab Quake then. Probably only cost you a couple of quid. Go for it. Honestly, superb stuff. Now all we need is a VR mod, eh? Come on, do it. So that's it. So just before I go, just a little quick talk about illness, especially as it's near Christmas and I know a lot of people will be feeling rough. So, yeah, I'm still getting over COVID. It's taking ages. So this is my 3rd week now. And I got rid of all what you'd class as the main symptoms within about 5 or 6 days. Since then, I've had, I don't know what you'd call it. I don't know whether I'd go as far as saying long COVID as yet. It's probably way too early to call it that. But I've still got respiratory problems. I will feel fine, and then I'll walk up a flight of stairs and feel exhausted. I get really tired in the mid to late afternoon, like sleepy, nap tired, which I never normally do. And this is 3.5 weeks in, so it's really bad. It's really bad, and I know some people don't get it as badly. I think I've been really unlucky with it, which is fair. I don't get ill very much, and I don't get ill very badly very often. So probably deserve it. But it's really horrible to see my wife go through it at the same time, especially as she doesn't cope with being ill very well, which is totally reasonable. There's no reason why you should be stoic in these situations. It's just a horrible situation to be in. I feel really bad for Brad, who doesn't have COVID but has a virus type thing by the sounds of it. I feel really bad for him just having that going on at the moment. It's all so grim, and Christmas can often be like that, in the run-up at least, when you start slowing down or you stop for Christmas if you have that fortune. And the thing to do is, yes, to be patient and kind with people who are ill, and look after people in your nearest environment, especially with the cost of living crisis and people not being able to heat their homes very well. But I would also say, as the main point really, is just remember that COVID is still around, and don't be ashamed to wear a mask. I mean, I'd given up and got out of the habit of it. Believe me, I'm not going to do that again, not if I go to a crowded space. I clearly caught it when I went to a Christmas market. We did it on the spur of a moment. We'd gone into town, we'd gone to a place that wasn't particularly busy, the library. Never going to be that busy, eh? And we decided on the spur of the moment to check out the new Chester market, and it was packed full of people, and we clearly got it there. Now, I would not do that again. I wouldn't go, I don't think. But if I was going to go, I would wear a mask, and I'd wear my 3M, like, full-on belt and braces, practically in a what's that film with the monkeys? Contagion? Whatever, that one. I would be like in a full-on Andromeda strain survival suit next time, because I never want to have COVID again. It's been dreadful, and my fear of losing my perspicacity, losing my ability to think properly, to have long COVID and for it to impact my brain over the long term, it terrifies me. I really don't, I've had asthma all my life. I've had terrible respiratory problems that have got better as I've got older. I don't want to have that. I don't want to be thinking that I'm going to have to look forward to basically having the equivalent of emphysema for the rest of my life when I'm only 46. So, I'm going back to taking a lot of care, and I don't care how people look at me or how they judge me for it. This thing is still around. It's really nasty. You should take steps to prevent getting it, people. Believe me. I avoided it for nearly 3 years. Then I caught it. It's the worst. I think conceptually now, I can say, even though I had a bout of gastroenteritis that made me lose 2 stone in about 5 days, which was probably the illest I've ever been, and was close to being hospitalised through dehydration. And I've had salmonella poisoning, and I've had the flu where I've slept for 16 hours straight because I was hallucinating and completely out of it, and had an ear infection at the same time. And yet this is still the thing that has upset me the most. So all I can say is please avoid it. Avoid big crowds. If you have to go, consider wearing a mask. Treat COVID with the horrible respect that it deserves. And with that, I'm going to leave you. So, sorry this has been a bit of an unexpected change to the format. I hope it was okay. Hope you were at least a little bit interested in the old guff that I was talking about this week. I've not been playing anything new. I had the Callisto Protocol all lined up to play, and then I didn't buy it because it's a technical mess on PC, and I wanted to play it on Steam Deck. I've had the opportunity to buy it on PS5, and I was like, nah, I can't bother. I'm going to wait till it's cheap next year now on PC, and they've fixed all the bugs. So no new game from me this week, and that's the reason why. But hopefully, yeah, the talk of the old gear and the old clobber was interesting enough. So, in the meantime, follow us on all the socials. Look after yourselves. Stay healthy. Stay COVID-free if you possibly can. Don't let Christmas put too much pressure on you. We're here on Discord if you want to reach out and talk, even on Christmas Day. Other than that, please do look after yourselves, stay safe, and stay sane.